Welcome, everyone. My name is Arthur Samuelson. I'm the program director at the Rowe Conference Center, and we are thrilled and delighted to be hosting Pádraig Tuama today. Um, uh, I'm speaking to you from Western Massachusetts. The Rowe Center has been here for almost 100 years. We run programs during the summer for kids and adults, summer camps, and the rest of the year we run weekend workshops on spirituality, personal growth, all the creative arts, nature, and social change, all the things we believe go into making for a flourishing life, which is what our real mission is. Um, of course, these last 2.5 years or so, we haven't been able to bring people together in community in person, although we have now started to do that again. We've had to do it online, and that allows us now to reach so many more people. Um, I am really excited to have Pádraig here. Maria Popova just chose his book, Poetry Unbound, as one of the top 20 books of the year. And there was a really interesting article in the New Yorker that maybe some of you have seen, where the writer says, Tuama has become a shepherd in the shambolic tradition of contemporary spirituality, treating poetry as a form of agnostic prayer, which I think is probably a really great summary of, uh, of the many things that come together in Pádraig's work. Pádraig is going to be speaking to us from Ireland. He's a poet, a theologian, and a conflict mediator. From 2014 to 2019, he was the leader of the Corrymeela community, Ireland's oldest peace and reconciliation community. Pádraig is the host of Poetry Unbound on NPR, which I'm sure many of you have heard, and he's the author of Poetry Unbound, 50 Poems to Open Your World. His book of poems, Feed the Beast, is coming out in about 2 weeks. And this is just a taste of a longer 5-week program that Pádraig is going to be offering with us at Rowe, called starting on January 29th, called Practicing the Inner Life. And we look forward to seeing many of you back again then. Welcome, Pádraig.
Thanks very much. And hello, everybody. It's so nice to be with you. Thank you very much for taking your time. I already see some faces of people that I know inside here, and it's so nice to see you. Thank you for coming again, whether we've met before or whether this is your first time. I'm really glad you've come. Tonight is just a bit of a chance to think a bit about what it means to landscape your life through some poems. I've got 6 poems that we'll take a hop, skip, and a jump through. And really, each of these poems is a demonstration of craft, but on a deeper level, it's an invitation for you to ask yourself a couple of questions. So if you've got a piece of paper, you might want to take a few notes for yourself. It might prompt a poem if you're somebody who likes to write poems, or it might just prompt, if you're somebody who keeps a diary, this might prompt some reflections for yourself. And so, yeah, I'll also invite at various times if you want to put things into the chat, just so that we can get a chance to hear who's in the room, albeit through reading who's in the room. And you're very welcome to do that. And you're also very welcome to keep it to yourself and to just keep it in your notebook or whatever document you're writing in. So let this be an hour that works for you as we think about it. The first question that I have is, I'm curious where you are, and I see that lots of you have been highlighting where you are in terms of if you're in a state or a province, if you're on lands of indigenous people that was been taken over, or maybe there was a treaty there, successful or a manipulative treaty. But I'm curious, even on a more parochial level, where are you? Are you in your own house? Are you in the house of somebody else? Are you in a chair looking out the window? Are you in your kitchen? Are you in a room that has changed totally since the pandemic? I'm curious where you are. I'd love it if you could put it into the chat. I'm curious to see where you are and what you might say as a result of where you are. In the living room. Hello to Craig in the living room. childhood home on a snowy day. Christy is in a loft. Emily is in a small room in your house where the poetry books live. That's where Amy is. Dining room table. In my daughter's room, that's where Catherine is. Patty Coleman is saying in a house built in 1742. My God. Denise on my couch with a dog snoozing at my lap. How very nice. It's better than a hot water bottle. My study, my son's apartment, in a home I dearly love, sitting at the studio, cozy, very nice. Guest bedroom, which is also your office. So many of us have turned various rooms that we had or corners of rooms into offices. In your house, in your studio, a study surrounded by books, my parents' place, and a pull-out sofa eating popcorn. That's a good way to be, Mona. um, in your wheelchair, your office, your home, Colorado, etc. Hello, Mandy. In a rented suite, my cave. In my bed, which has become my office. It's from Gwen. On my bed in my home, on a bed in my home of 36 years. From Sarah. Look at all these. In your study, away from the football game blaring of state rival. Okay. In your loft, in your PJs, outside splitting wood. Hi, Christian, to you outside. And snowflakes. Noga is seeing some snowflakes. And Shelley is looking out a window to Lake Ontario. How gorgeous. And that's the next question. Oh, Jamie's eating homemade beef stew in your chair. I would like to have some beef stew. It's a cold day in Ireland. I've actually got gloves on because my house was really cold. I was away for a few days and I didn't leave the heating on. And so when I came back, the house is a bit cold, so I'm wearing gloves inside. um, I'm curious, and some of you already begun to do that. Just look around and choose one thing that you can see. And it doesn't have to be the most important thing. You know, it might just be a cup, you know. That's what I've got. But what can you see? Choose one thing that you can see, and just choose it. And you don't try to choose the thing that's the most profound, but just, yeah, a wild turkey feather, a bowl of fruit, the cat, Christmas lights, candle, snowflakes, shoebox, a clown nose, the knitting I began 10 years ago, a dog toy shaped like a wrench, an apple, a crayon, a pond, you, me, encyclopedia, a box of matches. Look at all those lovely things that you can see. Little elf of my grandmother's, a tree by the window, a weekly planner, a Ganesh statue, a yoga belt, a portable keyboard, a violet tape measure, a little French prune plum tree, a small red mailbox that my husband leaves notes in, a card from a friend, holiday decorations, a rainbow maker, collage, a small picture of Dorothy Day, a forgotten cup of coffee now cold to the touch, my spinning wheel, frog and toad puppets, a bowl of fruit. A Christmas tree with no ornaments below 4 feet in the air, a quilt I made in 1992, 30 years ago. A foreboding box of chocolate. I like your adjective there, Lynn. How is a box of chocolate foreboding? Amazing. Post-it notes, a picture of Stowe, Vermont, baby pictures of my daughters and grandchildren. And one of the things that think about the object that you chose, whether you wrote it down or whether you've just written it in your notebook. What does it know? I'll say that again. I've got a frog in my throat. What does it know? What does it see back? If you were to look at that foreboding box of chocolates, what does it know? What is its intelligence? What does it see back? So much of art is about having a relationship with object. It's an object lesson, and choosing an object that somehow is a storage place, a container for intelligence, whether that's a painting, a story, a poem, even in choreography, there can often be so much to do with an object, real or imagined, invoked or carried. A film, there's often an object that carries something. And I'm curious, what is it that object that you chose, ordinary and random as you chose it, what does it know? What does it know about you? What does it see back? What is its intelligence? It knows how much work I put into teaching, love and constancy. The apple knows ripeness. The glasses, spectacles know your absolute 100% dependence on them. Life is fleeting. My grief, my brilliance. snowflake sees the warmth that would transform it. It knows it's not real. It knows when you're sleepy. That you love to make people laugh. A memory of your sister. I think Sean said that. I saw that there. David, it watches you striving. Ganesh knows all, Janet says. Humanity. Amanda says, my perseverance and forgetting and returning. Deb says, it contains a map of what I value the most. How to wait. Generations before me who've loved it. How lovely. It knows my pulse. The rattle knows my baby daughter's focus and determination to reach it as she learns to crawl and move on her own for the first time. How lovely. I love it when I see my cat. I see love when I see my cat Misha. Non-human patience waiting for a human to pick up a brush and begin. It was about aging, a father in a medical waiting room. Red Riding Hood knows who to trust. Yeah, she does now. More than human. The fountain pen knows your reluctance to face the page, that it's just a carrier. The keyboard knows my longing to be in deep relationship with it, Mona says. If my ambitions outstrip my actions, Corinne says. Care for me, and I will add perfume and nourishment, your basil plant. It's calm and bright and beautiful. So there's, oh, thanks, Kathy, the wood stove. With your help, I keep you warm. That's very nice. There's a way within which what we look at can be looking back at us. And I want to look at a poem by Joy Harjo in a way that she reframes things. This is from her book, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. And it is a poem that is the title poem of that book, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. I think it was published in 2015 with W. W. Norton. And it is a poem that looks at how is it that we are beheld and held by the things that we think are objects, but actually we are fleeting, and often what we're looking at is much more permanent. Lots of you through HR or personnel processes at work or in a volunteer capacity will have come across when people say, you know, let's create a kind of let's create some ground rules. You know, that kind of idea. Somebody would say, well, we're going to have a discussion between the members of 2 departments or members of 3 different voluntary organizations or people in the neighborhood or the neighborhood association. Let's just create some ground rules. And they might say something like, well, let's have one person talking at a time, or let's not interrupt each other, or put your phones to silent, that kind of idea of ground rules. And in conflict mediation and in all kinds of group dynamic processes, often what you're taught is to find a way to establish ground rules. Some people just arrive with a list of ground rules to say, look, we're just going to have these ground rules, basic ones. Does anybody want to add to them? Or other people say, let's start off with a blank sheet and come up with them ourselves. There's all kinds of ways to do it. I like to look at ground rules at the end to say, let's reflect on what our ground rules have been. So not saying what we think we will do, but what we have done. Clearly, we've been happy to interrupt each other because we have interrupted each other for the last 5 days or whatever. So I like to do retrospective ground rules because I think they can be very interesting. But I wouldn't do that with groups in trauma. That wouldn't be a helpful thing to do with groups in trauma. So here is part of a poem by Joy Harjo, who recently finished 3 years as US Poet Laureate. She was the first Indigenous woman from the United States from what is now called the United States, to be in the role of Poet Laureate with the US Library of Congress. So this is called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. And it is the first part of that poem. Set conflict resolution ground rules. Recognize whose lands these are on which we stand. Ask the deer, turtle, and the crane. Make sure the spirits of these lands are respected and treated with goodwill. The land is a being who remembers everything. You will have to answer to your children and their children and theirs. The red shimmer of remembering will compel you up the night to walk the perimeter of truth for understanding. As I brushed my hair over the hotel sink to get ready, I heard, by listening, we will understand who we are in this holy realm of words. Do not parade pleased with yourself. You must speak in the language of justice. So This is an extraordinary poem. It's just the first part of this poem, and it's the book itself is called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, and this is the title poem. There's Joy Harger, the name of the poet, in case you're interested in getting this book. Um, there's a number of things to point out about this poem. First of all, look at all these single end stop lines. You know, there's one line there, a sentence there, sentence there, sentence there, sentence there. They are, in a certain sense, imperative sentences. Recognize whose lands these are in which we stand. It's delivered in a voice of authority, command, invitation to, but a voice that's speaking really confidently. Do not parade please with yourself. Look at that, this the penultimate one there. And then here, you must speak in the language of justice. There is confidence and clarity in this voice. And I always think that this voice knows a lot. This voice knows what it's like for these things to be ignored. This voice knows the land. Ask the deer, turtle, and the crane. This voice is saying, inasmuch as often when we speak about ground rules, we can often focus on this word rules. This voice is saying, let's focus here. Let's focus on ground. What does the ground know? Remember when I asked you just a few minutes ago, what is it that that object, that random object you chose, knows? You were able to locate yourself in terms of the gaze of what that object sees back. This is what Joy Harjo is doing for us. Our topic for our little taster session today is managing your life with poetry and mapping your life with poetry too. I used both words, managing and mapping. And in a way, one of the things that Joy Harjo does is to say to us through this poem, we are mapped here where something bigger is the thing that is the map. We are fleeting and passing. And the question for us is how we will conduct ourselves, that there is an ethic and a way of being that we are being called to. This is a poem of profound moral intelligence. And I don't mean that in terms of moral intelligence linked with one approach or not. I mean this as a moral intelligence that's linked with the question about what it means to be human in the world and what it means to be on the land. Look at this. The land is a being who remembers everything. It's not the land is a being that remembers everything, or the land bears the impact about what you do to it. The land isn't spoken of in this depersonalized abstract pronoun. The land is a being who remembers everything. And then you will have to answer to your children and theirs. This is a poem that is locating us in terms of a span of time. What's going to happen today and in 50 years and in 100 years and in 150 years. And how it is that what we're doing today is being mapped into that, is being mapped into a landscape of time. And then here, there's another who. The land is a being who remembers everything. You saw that there. And then by listening, we will understand who we are in this holy realm of words. There's a large questions about identity that often people understandably are consumed with. This poem has an understanding to say that identity might come from listening, and identity also might come from locating yourself in a story that's bigger than yourself, rather than thinking that you have to seek and to create and define your identity, that actually you'll be sought and created and defined by something that's bigger, a sacred narrative that's larger. And I think what's being proposed here is the ground and the creatures who live in the ground and the intelligence and the ethic of being a creature of the ground. This whole poem, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, if you look up the Poetry Foundation, you will see the entire poem of it. There's about 7 parts to it there. So if you can't wait to purchase it or order it from your library, you can just put Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings into the Poetry Foundation website and you will get that whole 7-part poem. It's long and I love it. I think it's a magnificent poem. The next question I want to think of when it comes to managing and mapping your life is to think of limitations and whether it is that you've ever felt like where you are has had limitations. I just came from visiting my parents. I drove up today. That's why my house was cold, because I had the heating off while I was away for a few days. And you know, I visited my parents in the house that I grew up in Cork. Many of you who know Cork. And Of course, a house like that has so many memories, you know, memories of being 7, memories of being 10, memories of being 15, memories of being 17. And, you know, I left the day after I turned 18. You know, it was a place that mostly for my teenage years I wanted to leave. And in a certain sense, a place that I felt held back by. I had no great aspirations for myself. I didn't ever think that I'd do anything interesting, but I knew I just wanted to leave. um, and there was a sense that it wasn't that I had fame awaiting me that I thought that somehow this was holding me back from, but there was a life that I wanted to live that I could never imagine being free enough to live while living in that same place. And I'm curious, and this is not for putting in the chat, this is for your own private action, so don't put anything in the chat. I don't want anyone to feel pressure. But I am curious, where is it in your life where you have felt limitation? Is it a place? Is it, it might be a specific place, but it might be in a job. Or it might be that you've held yourself back and haven't picked up that violin that you know you're able to play, and you just because you're embarrassed to think, oh, I should be better than what I am. Where is a place of limitation for you? Is it physical? Is it practice based? Is it based on employment? Is it based on a circle of people or a person that you've oriented your life around? And again, don't put it in the chat because I don't want anyone to feel pressure. But I'm curious for you to locate limitation and to locate a place, an experience, a circumstance that has been a place of limitation for you. And what's the impact of that limitation been? Has it caused pain, or has it caused anger or bitterness? Has it been a kind of electricity that has propelled you into making some decisions that have been fruitful? I'm sure it can be a number of these things. It doesn't have to just be one. More than one thing can be true at the same time. I'm curious what you would say some of the impact of this limitation has been, and what your relationship with it has been like. You might say, you know, for 10 years, actually, my relationship with that limitation was bitter. But I've been in relationship with it for so long that I'm okay with it now. I don't know. There isn't one answer. I'm just curious for you to explore what that is, where that is, and how that is for you. As we talk about managing your life with poetry and mapping your life with poetry, there is no perfect map. There is no right way to do things. There is the way that you're living, and the question is to how you're living it now. And for me, poetry is an invitation into beginning to tell the truth back to yourself about what's happening. And therefore, from that, to think, what am I hearing? What am I saying? What am I hearing back? What is being discovered in me as I'm in conversation with the circumstances of my life? I want to share with you a poem by Patrick Kavanagh. Patrick Kavanagh is probably my favorite dead Irish poet. That's the way to say it. I have all kinds of categories of favorite poets, and Patrick Kavanagh is my favorite dead Irish one. And we learned Patrick Kavanagh every year as children in school. And I need to tell you that I despised him. He hated his life. He was from County Monaghan, which isn't too far from where I am right now. I'm in County Fermanagh. He was from County Monaghan. Um, he was from a poor farming family, and there wasn't much money in the family, and there wasn't much money in the parish either. And he felt permanently held back. And he dreamt of going to Dublin to be around literary society. He had a great aptitude for poetry and a deep, almost savant capacity to write beautiful poetry. Highly, highly skilled intuitively as well as on a level of technique. And he dreamt of going to Dublin. And a lot of people in Dublin in the 1930s were writing poems about the peasant poet. And so he thought that he would find friends there. And he didn't. When he got there, they were intimidated by him. They patronized him and they shamed him. And really, for many years, he was bitter. And he wrote invictive literary criticism in a small journal that his brother funded. And if you woe betide you, if you came under the poison pen of his brilliant critique, he was very skilled, but he did not make friends. And in many ways, the bitterness and the pain and the shame that he had about where he was from, he carried into Dublin. And it was a difficult thing to be around him, I imagine. All the while, he still was a very, very gifted poet. But he carried this profound sense of limitation with him, never feeling quite like he fit in. And I mean, I do wish that he had been treated better. I absolutely do. But I also know, and I think lots of us know, maybe all of us know, that you'll never fully feel like you fit in. And while we do need to address structural dynamics of exclusion, there is no structure that's big enough to contain a human being feeling like they fully belong. There will always be that part of you that doesn't. Always be that part of you that says, no, I don't. Always be that part of you that says, I'm not good enough. That is an invitation to a part of you that is in limitation to develop a mature conversation between it. To not have that, I think, is to lack in a sense of the project of being an adult, the project of being human, the project of being an artist. Later in his life, maybe 10, 12 years before he died, and he died young, I think he was only 66. Patrick Kavanagh met someone and fell in love. And actually, they married the year that he died. And he was returned through love to a great sense of himself. And it took into his 50s before he began to have that experience. And he began in the poetry from his 50s to explore the place that he was from, that he had hated all his life. Um, the word in English, bog, B-O-G, is one of the words in English that comes from Irish. Bog, as we would say it, means soft. And he's from a bogland, an area that's soft. And he wrote this gorgeous poem about bogland in the area where he's from. So I'm going to share it with you, and then we'll have a look at it. Um, the one. Green, blue, yellow, and red. God is down in the swamps and marshes, sensational as April, and almost incredible the flowering of our catharsis. A humble scene in a backward place where no one important ever looked. The raving flowers looked up in the face of the one and the endless, the mind that has balked the profoundest of mortals. A primrose, a violet, a violent wild iris, but mostly anonymous performers. Yet an important occasion is the muse at her toilet, prepared to inform the local farmers that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful God was breathing his love by a cutaway bog. Cutaway bog in bogs in Ireland and other places too. You can cut at the old oak that's in the bog and then burn it once you've dried it out. So that's the cutaway bog. So this is a sonnet, and it's a sonnet on the one hand that kind of looks at the muse at her toilet, that classical image that you'd find in Greek mythology or in classical art of the muse at her toilet. And by toilet here, it doesn't mean from toilette, the French, it doesn't mean that the muse is kind of urinating. It means that the muse is looking into a mirror and covering themselves with unguents or perfume and preparing and pampering themselves. Um, and so it's a poem that looks at a place that isn't important and says that too is as important as these classical images. And it's a sonnet, it's a formal sonnet as well. Look at the rhyming scheme: red in cred, marshes, catharsis, place, face, looked, balked, violet, toilet, that's a visual rhyme there, performer, farmer. And then look at the last couplet: God, bog. Look at the audacity of that final rhyming couplet. God and bog. Two-thirds of Patrick Kavanagh's poems concern God, and he was not a formal Catholic. He was not liked by the Irish Catholic Church because he was constantly challenging them. But nonetheless, the question of God for him was a question of existence. And here he rhymes God with bog. And he is saying, if there is a God, that God is found in a cutaway bog, in the ordinary place, the place of limitation, the place that when it looks back at you, knows the power it has over you and knows the limiting power that it's been able to hold over you. That's a complicated kind of intelligence, and it's a complicated experience to live with. And yet, while it is important to say, I want structural impediments taken away from the project of being human, we will always have to face limitations in ourself, because that is part of the project of being human, is to recognize the pain, the sense of complication we carry from our own unconscious, from the dream world of our lives. I don't want there to be any structural impediments, but even in the absence of structural impediments, we will all have to face the poison, the anxiety that we carry. Nothing can take that away from us except the soul work that it takes time to do. Um, One of the things I love about this poem by Patrick Kavanagh is that it is an invitation for us to think through what is my, I suppose you can almost call it, spiritual relationship with the limitations that I've carried with me. And by spiritual, I don't mean religious. Spirit comes from the word spirare in Latin, meaning breath. And a spiritual relationship with limitation is, what's it like for me to breathe? Am I suffocated, or am I able to breathe? That's how I understand it. And that, therefore, is a question of the body, literally the body. To be spiritual is to be able to use the meat of your lungs to breathe in a way to say, I can try to practice better breathing in places of my own limitation. That is a profoundly physical and therefore spiritual experience to do that. I am a very tangible and practical, um, earthy person. I do not like speaking in abstracts, and I'm not very good at speaking in abstracts. And for me, spirituality is entirely about the quality of breathing in a time when something is threatening to suffocate you. What does it mean in the limitations you carry with yourself to try to practice something that is of the quality of breath? Um, I'm at this stage. Oh, look, Catherine's just said that you're on a course. I just opened up the chat. Um, at this stage, I'm curious to see if a few of you want to put a question into the chat. I don't want to just leave questions until the end. We've got about another 25 minutes or so. But I'm curious to see if any of you have got questions you want to put in, or just things that occur to you as a question. I probably won't get to answer them all, and I might get to answer maybe 3 or 4, or respond. Answer isn't the right word. But just in the 2 poems we've looked at so far, Joy Harjo and Patrick Kavanagh, what comes to your mind as a question? And if you have one, put it in. And my apologies in advance. Yeah, that I won't get to too many of them. The first one I see is from Rebecca. What if the thing threatening to suffocate you is what the world calls spirituality? Yeah, find a different way to breathe. There is no one way towards spirituality, is there? There's no. The question for me is always what is helping you to breathe. Um, there's a phrase in Irish that I love, will probably be on my grave. Er ská a chéile waras na daoine is what it says. Er ská a chéile waras na daoine. It is in the shelter of each other that the people live. And the word shelter here, ska, can also mean shadow. And in a certain sense, I mean, shadow is also a good thing when you're in the heat. But in a certain sense, I like sometimes to juxtapose the idea of shelter and shadow, and to look at what shelters me shadows other people. What I find to be of comfort, somebody else will find to be of oppression. And that's okay. Because like I will find great comfort in poetry, but somebody else might say, I absolutely hate it. Great. Like there's no rule. What does give you comfort? Um, and when it comes to what some people call spirituality, I know that there is no kind of spirituality that will work for everybody, you know. And so that's what I think about regarding that. Mhm. Um, Kelly is asking about the potential connection between the 2 poems, Kelly McCune. And indeed, there is a connection between the 2 poems, because I was interested in what it means to look at the earth and to be looked back at by the earth, and to think of who's looking at the earth. Um, Often, I think, in places of limitation, like if you come from a backward town, or you live in a place where you think people are laughing at you for living from there, all those kinds of things that we have grown up with and maybe are still existing, or your desk at work is located on the 3rd floor and everybody knows that nobody on the 3rd floor gets promoted, all those kinds of things. The question for me is, what is the quality of your gaze to the thing that you're looking at? And how is it that A, it can look at you, look back at you, and B, how can you modify the way you look at it? And I think what Joy Harjo does is to say it's looking back at you as you look at it. And what Patrick Kavanagh eventually was able to do was to have his gaze converted towards seeing a capacity to rhyme God with bog, which is quite an extraordinary and audacious thing. It's no wonder that he wasn't liked by the Catholic Church if he was doing that. Jane, you said it nicely there. A connection is to celebrate the humble or the underrated. Repeat the title of the first poem. Oh, thank you. Casey Botono repeated that, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. Is there a particular collection I'd recommend about Patrick Kavanagh? Casey, you've asked that. In fact, there is. There's a collection called No Earthly Estate, and it's edited by a man called Tom Stack. No Earthly Estate, and it is a gathering of all of the religious poems of Patrick Kavanagh, together with a few essays, very helpfully. So No Earthly Estate, and it's edited by Tom Stack, and it's the religious poetry of Patrick Kavanagh, and those essays are very, very helpful. Yeah. So the last question I'll be able to get to, and then we're going to look at some more poems, is could I explain the statement that I made in Calgary? I don't believe in God, but I do believe in prayer. I completely believe that prayer is an utterance of the human spirit. It comes from some place that we do not know. I think prayer and poetry and expression, they're all expressions of desire. All art is an expression of communication and completion and yearning and desire and emptiness too, because to know your desire is to know you don't have it. And so, in a certain sense, to have a relationship with desire is to have a relationship with nothing and the not yet of what your desire is. I often think that the too easy a definition of the question of God, of the one to whom we pray, can get in the way and can give an answer to something that we haven't sat with for long enough as a question. And for me, I am much more interested in where prayer comes from than where it's going. I don't propose that that's the way that you should think about it. I am only interested in trying to recruit you to how it is that I understand these things. But I am interested in saying, what does it mean for us to talk together about these things? What does it mean for us to be in connection with deep desire? We are, if you're interested, and if you're looking for a Christmas present for yourself or whatever present you have for the holidays, I will be doing 5 sessions with the Rowe Centre in the new year, where we'll be looking at spiritual practices. And one of the 5th session will be looking at desire. And what does it mean to have a deep connection with desire? We'll be looking at story as well, looking at experiences of limitation, and we'll also be looking at practice, and looking at the complicated question of religion as well. I've studied religion for a long time. I'm finishing a PhD in poetry and theology at the moment, and my first 2 degrees are in theology. So I have a lot of time for the study of religion, even though I am not a traditionally religious person anymore. But I have learnt a lot from trying to believe in God. And I think there are ways within which all of us are asking serious questions about how it is that we live a life, and live a life with an ethic, and live a life where we're trying to create some kind of meaning by which we can hold a life together, and hopefully some kind of action that is good for the world and good for our fellow human person. And religion has tried and failed alongside all other kinds of systems that have tried and failed. Science too, it's easy for science to think that it is objective, and all you have to do is just look at eugenics and realize, oh, science also has done terrible things in the name of itself. Each system has ways within which it can perpetuate the violence that it says that it seeks to undo. And so we'll look at that in the first session. I like these questions you're asking. Let me see, is there one more? Craig is saying, much of suffering comes from an evaluation against a benchmark. That benchmark can be heterosexuality, whiteness, certainly socioeconomic level, masculinity. How do we push back against benchmarking and ask our community to just normalize the place and characteristics that we arrive at? Thanks for that question, Craig. I suppose there's so much in what you're saying. I really like the insight of it. I think structurally there is really important pushback, of course. to look at situations where we can change, where there are laws and formal impediments and tolerated prejudices, that there would be ways with which, on a structural level, that we can change systems. But there's always going to be, I think, a certain addictive quality to the human experience of comparison. And you use that in the one, two, three, four, five, six, the seventh word, evaluation. And even in a system where we have full access, people will still evaluate themselves, compare, comparison. These are such difficult experiences. And I can sometimes think that some kind of comparison of ourselves might be a motivator to increasing your skill in your art. But often comparison can be like a cancer. It doesn't know how to die, and it can eat away at you. And that can be a really complicated thing for us to live with. And so I'm always interested in what it means to have a something better than the yes, no, or who's the top or who's the best answer that comparison puts across. Comparison can sometimes have an imagination that only the top wins. And that, I think, is a limitation to art, and a limitation to creativity, and a limitation to the experience of relating well to your own limitation as well. We're going to look at another poem, and this is a poem that I absolutely love by Miroslav Holub. Have a look at this magnificent poem. It's a strange poem. It's got a strange cadence to it. A brief reflection on maps. Albert sent Georgi, who knew a thing or two about maps, by which life moves somewhere or other, used to tell this story from the war, through which history moves somewhere or other. From a small Hungarian unit in the Alps, a young lieutenant sent out a scouting party into the icy wastes. At once it began to snow. It snowed for 2 days, and the party did not return. The lieutenant was in distress. He had sent his men to their deaths. On the third day, however, the scouting party was back. Where had they been? How did they manage to find their way? Yes, the man exclaimed, we certainly thought we were lost and awaited our end, when suddenly one of our lot found a map in his pocket. We felt reassured. We made a bivouac, waited for the snow to stop, and then with the map found the right direction, and here we are. The lieutenant asked to see that remarkable map in order to study it. It wasn't a map of the Alps, but the Pyrenees. Goodbye. That goodbye at the end, people have written entire books reflecting on what on earth is the goodbye. Is it funny? Is it shutting down? What is it? He's a great poet. You'll find loads of his work all over. There's some great collections of his work, and you'll find, just put his name into Google, you will find it. Take a screenshot if you're worried that you won't remember. This is fascinating in the way that it's saying sometimes people are looking for a way, and they imagine that they're looking for the way, and actually any way will help. This person, they were lost, and he gave the people in his troop confidence by saying, I have a map. And they were like, okay. And because they were able to be contained in that, they found their way out. Even though it was the map to the Pyrenees, not the Alps. He had the map to the wrong place, but it was a map. And that was the invitation, was to say, let's spend some time realizing that you're not looking for the perfect way. You're not looking for the single solitary answer that will give you the answer to absolutely everything, to tell you where you are and how exactly to do it step by step to get out. Nothing will take the responsibility that we must take for ourselves, is one of the things that this poem is saying. And in a certain sense, you see that the person who said, I have the map, did they know already themselves, this isn't the proper map, but I'm going to try to help. One of the intelligences of this poem, I think, is to say that we are both the lost person as well as the person with the map. It isn't like there's one person who has the confidence to be able to say, oh, you can be the one who produces the wrong map that nonetheless works. And all of us are the lost people, as well as the person wondering, are they going to get out, as well as the person who has the wrong map in their pocket. And how is it you can create a conversation in yourself with all of those things? I love the playful intelligence of this poem, the play from knowledge. I'll put it back up again just so you can take a screenshot of it if you're interested in the title. here we are, a brief reflection on maps. I'm sure some of you might want to write that down, but you'll find it, and you'll find many essays discussing this magnificent poem. Um, he was an immunologist as well, this man. He knew a lot. Um, yes, it's a great poem. Some of you know this poem well. I'm curious about who helps. There's a way within which what helps in this poem. What helps is a certain audacity to think there isn't one way out of this. There is just going to be the way I choose to make my way out of this. Here's a poem that I'll share with you. This is a poem that I've written for my best friend, Dave. Here it is. I was struck by the power of friendship and how friendship can hold you steady. And I had been, like lots of us during COVID, bereaved a number of times. And I was struck by how the company of a close friend helped me enormously to remind myself of everything I forgot each time I was in grief. And that's a question I have for you. Who is it that helps you remember? And who is it? It might be a friend, might be an extra neighbor, might be somebody whose company is a little bit irritating. It might be a favorite poet. It might be a particular book. I don't know. It might be a TV show. But who is it that returns you to yourself? There's a poem called The Lifeline. Here's what I know. When death's bell tolls again, I need to go make something, anything, a poem, a pie, a terrible scarf with my terrible knitting. I need to write a letter, remind myself of small lifelines all around me. When death sounds, I usually forget much of what I learned before. I go below. I count the echoes of other people's happiness. I carve that hole in my own chest again. Pull out all my organs, wonder if they'll ever work again. Stuff them back. Begin again. And it's the stuffing back, begin again, that friendship does for me. I realize that in times of grief, it is so easy to just think, okay, this is the end of everything, and to forget what it means to be alive, and that the grief itself threatens to say you are your own grief. Not just that you're in grief or that you've got grief on you, but that you are your grief, and that it will only complete when it has consumed you. That's the threat of grief. And in a way, we kind of need to give into that and to allow ourselves to feel it. But also, what we need are the lifelines around us and people who will say, yeah, but I still like your company. And I'm going to text every day, or I'm going to call around, or I also need your help for me because I'm in my own grief as well. Who and what are the lifelines around you that draw you out of yourself? Not as a solution, not to say, oh, the grief is past. Of course it's not. It takes its own time. Grief takes time. But who is it that says to you, in the midst of the sadness and the death you're living through, here's also signs of life. My love for you, your love for me, the need I have of you. It might be an animal that just says, or just drags you out of the door. There's all kinds of ways within which there's small lifelines around us. And that is a way, I think, to manage your life. And this small, humble sonnet of a poem is a desire to praise what it's like to have somebody in your life that evokes in you, hopefully not just one person, many people, that evokes in you, the living and the dead, that evoke in you a reminder about what it means to create. Sherry, I see that you are making something as you're listening. You're making some art. And I often think that one of the things that can get terribly in the way of our flourishing, which was a lovely word that Rowe pays a lot of attention to, one of the things that can get in the way of our flourishing is imagining that art is only successful when it becomes famous or when it becomes something that you get all of your money from, or something that is telling you, that has suddenly become a career. And art has long had a meaning far deeper than that. Art is something that we make that makes us back. I've been spending a lot of time reading around and looking at the images of those hands in those caves all across different parts of the world. And somebody put their hand on the wall and spat around it and looked at the outline of their hand on the cave and thought, that's telling me something about who I am. They weren't imagining about becoming Instagram famous. They may not have even had a name for themselves. We have no idea who they were, what they were, how they were. Did they have a word for you? Could they conjugate verbs? We have absolutely no idea. And yet we continue to do the same thing. We make things that look back at us and say, I'm making you as you're making me. Something reciprocal occurs in the creative act. The creative act is not just for people who are professionally artists. Creative act is for all of us. Hence, in that poem, I need to go and make something. A poem, that is my craft and trade. And then a pie, I'm an okay cook. And I'm a terrible knitter, but I do love knitting. So hence, a terrible scarf with my terrible knitting. It's not about the professional quality of what it is we make. It's about what it means to make. And it's about being made by the thing that makes us. It might be practicing your scales on a piano or a guitar that you'd learned and just think, no, it's a comfort. Nice. Um, the 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 practice of comparison and the practice of thinking, or would I be invited onto a radio program to do a recital? That's the wrong question. The question is it making me? Is it returning me to myself? Is it one small lifeline of a reminder of the again that's possible? And if it is, well, then do it. That's the invitation. In the last couple of minutes, let's just take another couple of questions in the chat as we finish off. Did I always know that? Jamie has asked. That's a nice question. I didn't always know it, no. I think I've spent a lot of my life in profound self-consciousness and feeling like I'm not good enough. I didn't, feeling everybody's better than me and that I'm always going to fail. And yeah, I've had to grow in my relationship with that. And of course, I can slip back into that easily. But I have been learning more and more that there is something really important about what's made. But I always doodled, always doodled. In fact, as a small boy, I thought that I wanted to become a graphic designer. That wasn't the word I had for it in the 80s, but I wanted to do calligraphy. I was told my parents were both from very poor families, and so they were like, "There's no jobs in calligraphy. You need to study science or something." Instead of which, I studied poetry and theology. My God, calligraphy definitely would have brought in more money than poetry or theology. But there was something for me really interesting in decorating a word and seeing language decorated looking back. And so, in a certain sense, I always did get great comfort from art, even in doodles on the corner of pages. So, Fiona Prine, or the office of Fiona Prine, has said something beautiful here. I feel like the voice of a familiar friend, a map of sorts, remind me that I'm indeed traveling forward, moving ahead and out of the desperation. I guess the awful thing about grief is that we do and must get lost in it over and over to be remade, to re-emerge different, but back to familiar security. That's so true, Fiona. How lovely to see you. We are a couple of minutes from finishing. I'm so glad to have spent some time with you in poetry and looking at all of these experiences about how it is that we can manage our life in a conversation with ourselves, with our friends, with those things that remind us of ourselves and the things that bring us back to the again of our own creation. If you're interested in joining these 5 weeks in the new year, it'd be lovely to see you there. And those sessions are 2 hours long, I believe. And so they've got more generosity for more time and more engagement with each other for 5 Sundays in a row. I'm so glad to have been with you this time. Thanks very much for taking time. And I'm going to hand back to the good people from the Rowe Centre. Thanks very much, Fia, for all of the management of the group. And thanks very much, everybody from Rowe.
Thank you so much, Pádraig. And we look forward to seeing you at Practicing the Inner Life, a 5-part exploration of what spiritual practice can mean to you. We've also got, Fia, would you put up if you didn't already, put up the URL for that? And we also have a number of poetry programs I just want to talk about very quickly, because I think they'll be of special interest to you. We are doing a year-long study of Rilke with Joanna Macy and Anita Burrows, who have translated almost all of Rilke. And that's going to be once a month for 12 months. We have an afternoon program with Jane Hirschfield. And we have a 5-week writing program on nature with Chip Blake called Putting Winter into Words. And I hope we get to see you at some of those, and check out our website for what we have coming up on site. Thank you so much for joining us.